good, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing all right.
Good. Welcome to KMKR, to the Venus Rising radio show with me. I'm so happy that you're joining me today.
Well, I'm happy to be here with you virtually.
So anyway, I'm really curious if you can talk to me a little bit about all the different musical projects you have going on. I know you have the Hatpin Duo. I know you do Loveland. And what other bands are you in?
Well, I'm not in any other projects than that, like on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm.
I do tend to do little one-offsy things here and there. I've been known to play with Mark and Oscar sometimes. I just kind of sit in randomly with people when they need. I do a little bit of kind of not bandy stuff as well, like some chamber music, and I did like a musical last year. So Loveland and Hatpin Duo are kind of enough to keep me busy on like a permanent commitment.
Talk to me a little bit about the Hatpin Duo, because that's your project, I take it.
Yes, that is my child, as we refer to them, I guess.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I actually performed most of that material for years solo, but it gets a little bit lonely. It's like really helped me confront my stage fright and anxiety in this way that I don't think anything else could have ever done. Like, you're up there all by yourself, and let me tell you, there is no room to hide with that harp. This is not like, you know, a guitar and you just hit a little wrong thing and nobody notices. No, everybody notices when I hit a wrong. So, yeah, I mean, it's just like it's all so exposed what you're doing with the harp. So yeah, I had to get over those fears in a really poignant way. But then after a while, I decided that I kind of wanted to play music with somebody else. So it's more fun that way. And yeah, Deanna and I had actually played on a project previously, one of those kind of one-off things. And it's been fantastic.
So you were primarily looking for a string player to play with, as opposed to a guitar player,
yes,
or a piano, or...
Absolutely dead set on having a violist, as a matter of fact.
Okay.
Because as a violinist, there was no way I wanted a violinist in my project.
I think I get it.
Actually, the viola, the range is way more appropriate. That was one of the things that I discovered when I had played with violins with my harp music, is that I have this kind of like Celtic-y, Scandinavian vocal thing going on, and the violin with the ranges on that, it just doesn't blend well. And so the viola blends a little bit better with the vocals and is a little bit more unassuming.
So talk to me a little bit about this idea of Celtic / Scandinavian.
Well, you know, it wasn't really something that I consciously did on purpose. That was just how I wanted to sing. And I felt like that was what came naturally to me. But I feel like there are an awful lot of people, and not to knock it, you know, doing a more like kind of jazzy vocal style, more bluesy, especially amongst the women in town. There didn't seem to be a lot of people, you know, leaning into these other stylistic options. So I decided that was going to be me.
I love it. I'm super interested in hearing what you mean by the Scandinavian side of things. I mean, I'm really fascinated with what you're talking about.
Well, so I guess stylistically speaking, in that area of the world, I am more of like a British Isles like kind of background, Scots, Irish, but some of my Scots ancestors were Vikings before they were Scots. You know, there's a lot of intermingling in that area. It does tend to be a more falsetto-y, higher pitched kind of vocal styling. If you think about Anne Brune or Bjork or, you know, a long list of Kate Bush, you know, all of that kind of stuff. That's stylistically what's common in that area of the world, as opposed to these very kind of like lower center of gravity styles of singing that are more bluesy or jazzy.
That's really interesting. I like how you're making that distinction. I'm thinking also, you know, like the folk songs.
I play a little bit of Scottish fiddle as well. And I really enjoy playing Celtic folk music, for lack of a better word. But I do feel like there's a lot of room for modernization. When you look at folk music that comes out of Scotland, Ireland, Britain, Scandinavia, you tend to get either these really hardcore traditional ideas, you know, where it's just like jigs and reels, and you somehow end up on this opposite extreme where you get like the Pretenders and like really awful rock and roll. And like, there is this weird void in the middle.
And don't forget the Scandinavian heavy metal.
Yeah, I've seen some videos. But yeah, when I set out to make music, I set out to make my music. You know, I wasn't trying to like emulate anything or pull in those ideas. Those ideas just ended up coming out of me because that's what my background is and what I listen to. And
so talk to me some
you
more.
are what you eat.
Talk to me some more about your background. What is your background musically?
Complicated. I started playing the violin when I was 9. So I was initially classically trained. I immediately started learning other things, though. I started guitar, I think, when I was like 11. I played in the Balalaika Orchestra when I was in middle school and high school. And I started playing the upright bass actually when I was around 11 or 12 as well. And then when I got to high school, I actually stopped playing violin and only played the upright bass and got into jazz. It's kind of how I got a background in improvisation. And then I dropped out of high school and life got weird. I got married. There's this whole kind of like other chapter of my life that didn't have music in it. I worked at a place called Southwest Strings. That was kind of my introduction back into my own world, so to speak. I didn't really think that I was ever going to perform again. And so I actually started repairing instruments. I went and I worked for a violin maker, an apprentice with him, and spent a lot of years doing that kind of stuff, thinking that I was not going to ever perform again. But it was a way for me to still be close to music and get back into playing just for myself. But then, you know, you work in a music store and eventually somebody convinces you to join a band. And before you know it, 10 years later, and here we are.
So that's really fascinating because I think I remember seeing a post of the inside of a violin. I was like, wow, what are you doing in there?
I just finished the cleats this morning.
So that is really fascinating. So you did the music store, you did repair, and you mentioned you have students.
Yeah, so now I mostly teach for my income, and that's been, a really great plan as it turns out, because I'm still working unlike a lot of my peers.
So are you teaching via Zoom?
Yeah, remote lessons, just like we're doing right now. Challenging sometimes, but it's keeping them playing and it's keeping me eating, and I think that works out for everybody.
So I'm curious, how did you get into the harp?
Serendipity. So one of the jobs that I had when I was repairing instruments was that I worked for Bookman's. I actually helped them build their musical instrument department. I started there with one folding table and my own box of tools that I brought in with me. We grew that and grew that. Somebody bought a harp and I was just kind of like messing around with it. I had always been fascinated with the harp, and I was just kind of sitting there messing around with this one, and a friend of mine who worked there was like, well, you know, my sister thought she wanted to play the harp when she was a teenager. Mm-hmm. And so my parents bought her one. She played it for 6 months, and it's been sitting at my parents' house for years ever since. If you want it, you can have it. And I was like, really? And it was just like a little lap harp. I was like, sure, why not? And so I brought it home and I wrote a song. I wanted to see what would happen if I tried to teach myself an instrument without any like outside guidance. Like if it was just me and the instrument and nobody telling me what to do, what would happen? It kind of started out as like an experiment. I learned a lot of really interesting things about how people learn music, and I also learned how to play the harp on the way. Yeah, it was kind of a way for me to compose and write music, because as someone who primarily plays a melody instrument, people have done it. Certainly there's a lot of fiddle players who front bands, but it's so much easier to write music if you're playing a corded instrument. And so it was a means for me to experiment with songwriting, really.
And so what else do you love about the harp?
When I was younger and I played upright bass, one of the things that I really, really loved about it and kind of missed was the feeling of having an instrument up against your chest, and being able to feel the vibrations coming through into your body, which still happens with a violin, but it's like the vibrations are smaller because the pitch is higher, and like it's just not the same experience. So with the harp leaning up against you, you can feel that, which is very profound. It's portable, more portable than a piano, more interesting than a guitar. This weird kind of like middle, people ask me a lot of times like what it's like playing the harp, and it is kind of like a cross between playing piano and guitar.
I can see that. So you still keep your finger in the classical music as well?
Well, that's kind of a recent development, actually. I've been going back to trying to, I mean, I've done it sporadically over the past, I don't know, like 5 years or so. But recently I've been trying to brush that up.
Did I see you post somewhere that you were doing an audition recently?
Yeah, that was for that chamber music. Yeah, I hadn't done auditions in a really long time. That was terrifying, but you have to start somewhere.
Exactly. Oh, and I totally get the whole performance anxiety. How did you deal with that?
In layers, like an onion. I think at first with a healthy or perhaps unhealthy amount of alcohol. Luckily, I was a lot younger then, because I certainly can't drink like that anymore. The opportunity to play music in a non-classical setting, because that's kind of where most of my anxiety and trauma came from. And I spending years doing that and doing the solo performing. But really what's helped a lot lately is actually returning to the classical music, you know, like going and meeting those fears from all the stuff that I walked away from, because now I have this whole career of playing folk music and writing my own material and playing with all these really fantastic musicians that I can go back and meet that now with confidence and kind of tear down those walls. So yeah, I think that any attempt to dive into performance anxiety is going to take a lot of different layers of approach and a lot of time. And a lot of patience with yourself. Mostly, I have students sometimes who come into their lessons and they're like, that's a thing that's happened to me, and I understand where they're coming from. Once you start down that path, you can't make it stop. The only way to make it stop is just to keep trying until it does. So keep getting up there and keep shaking your way through it, and repetition is the thing that cures anxiety. Just continually standing up to the fear over and over again. But I would go through cycles where it was like I would feel really under control and like not have felt nervous about anything in a really long time. And then like, bam, just out of the blue, I'd be a hot mess. Somebody who intimidated me would walk into a room, or I would be playing in a venue I'd never played in before, or, you know, playing with a musician I had never played with before. And it didn't always happen when those things happen, but every once in a while it's like, bam, there you go. You're just trying not to fall off the horse. There's this really great like musician self-help book called Effortless Mastery.
Yes.
Yeah. And they talk about the musician in the back of the room. And that's kind of that situation where you allow other musicians' very presence to intimidate you. And one of the things that actually helped me with that was playing with people below my skill level. Much later in my life, when I actually wound up in a situation where I was the one who was playing with people who I had to be patient with, it kind of dawned on me that, man, you have to be a real major to like judge people who are worse than you. You know? And so if somebody was going to do that to me, then obviously they were a major and I'd have.
What a great insight.
It takes kind of being on the other side of things sometimes to see that. Yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. But I want to kind of delve a little bit more into the Hatpin Duo, your music that you write, and talk about your writing process. I know it's a fluid thing, and there may be different ways that different songs come out, but would you just talk about that some?
Sure. No, I tend to be a music first kind of lady. There tends to be, most people are either one way or the other, words first or music first. Yeah, I'm definitely a music first person. I tend to get the structure of the thing under my fingers first, and then I try and put words to it. Other than that, it's just kind of intuitive process, you know? When I was early on doing the harp music, I would write like a song a month. I was very driven. And some of those were simpler songs that took me 10 minutes to write. Other ones were more complicated that would take me the whole month just to get it done. But as I started accumulating more music, I kind of slowed down on the writing process, because keeping all of that music in my head and being able to perform it, it's like, if I keep writing a bunch of new music, I'm going to have to let stuff go, or, you know, so it's like I've definitely slowed down from that pace just for my own sanity. I think that I've always tried to write music that is really specific and really vague at the same time. There's a lot of real me in there. And then at the same time, like, not in ways that pressure my listener to see things my way. Keep things vague enough, light enough, then people can attach to your art in the way that they need to. Rather than you imposing your artistic ideas on your listener, giving them space to approach it like a painting and walk up and be like, hey, what is this thing that's happening and how do I relate to it?
I like the analogy of walking up to a painting and being able to bring your own meaning to the song or to the painting or to the art that you're experiencing at that moment.
Oh yeah, because I mean, what an artist, whether they're a musician or any other kind of artist, thinks about their work is pretty meaningless. My own impressions of my own work have changed over time. And I think if you speak to a lot of singer-songwriters, they'll tell you those emotions that were there when I wrote that song, they're long gone. Now I've gone through like 4 other sets of emotions in the years I've performed this song that, like, now this song means something completely different to me than when I wrote it.
Oh, interesting. I like that. Yeah.
Because the other thing that I wanted to think about is that I knew a lot of musicians who were like, oh my God, I'm so sick of singing this song that I wrote. I've sang it 1,000 times and I don't want to sing it anymore. Writing stuff that I felt like was going to have longevity for me. And so making things malleable so that I can emotionally reevaluate how I connect to it over time, so that I can constantly be rediscovering my own material, which helps audiences constantly rediscover your material and allows people to connect to it where they can and want to.
I've never thought about it in that way before, about creating a song that would have longevity in that way. I
think when you write lyrics that are breathable, that don't have a really concrete meaning, an overt concrete meaning, you know, then they do tend to last a little bit longer for yourself.
So at some point you started teaching students.
Yeah. A friend of mine was like, hey, do you want to come teach? And I was like, yeah, actually, I was just thinking about starting doing that. So I teach at the Chicago store out on the east side. I don't require any of my students to practice. That's completely up to them. The ones that don't practice don't tend to keep coming back, but it's not my job to make people practice. I ask them at the beginning of every lesson, how much did we get to practice this week? And they're all honest with me. When they don't practice, they tell me they didn't practice. And I said, okay, well, let's practice now. I try really hard to structure my lessons in the context, especially with the young kids. They're in the driver's seat. That was really great. This is how we can maybe improve on that. Your choice. Do you want to do that again, or do you want to try something else? And always just allowing them to feel like they're the ones in control. And 9 times out of 10, they're going to be like, I want to do it again. I want to try again. I want to do better this time. But that way, when they are frustrated, they feel like they can speak up and say, I'm frustrated. I don't want to do this anymore. I want to do something. I think a lot of dealing with kids is about allowing them to feel like they're in control, because so many people all of the time are trying to control their lives and run their lives.
So true. I really appreciate you saying that.
Especially with kids, you have to allow their abilities to gauge the learning, looking for strengths, not pushing too hard on the weaknesses, and allowing them to develop on whatever unique path that's right for them. I think I learned an awful lot about how to teach from having a lot of really bad teachers.
How did you get into music?
My mother was really invested in giving me cultural experiences when I was a really small child. She bought season tickets to the opera when I was 5 and took me to the opera, which I think like somewhere deep in my mind, I love opera. And I think it's because like I fell asleep at every single performance, because it was like end past my bedtime. I was just like this 5-year-old child sitting in a seat, drifting slowly off to sleep to opera. There's this very like weird, soothing thing for me with that. But I took dance, I took, drawing classes and pottery classes and everything. I wanted to try all of it. It's just a matter of what I stuck with. I did ballet, tap, folklorico, Spanish club, all the things. I collected stamps. I have medals. Well, I was just like a super activity child. I wanted to do all the things. And so they had like demonstration to recruit for orchestra. Teacher got up there and played a little bit and talked about what orchestra was about. And so I went home and I was like, Mom, I want to play an orchestra. I want to play the violin.
If I recall correctly, I've also seen stuff about painting. Do you paint?
Yeah. So for the brief amount of time that I did actually pursue higher education, it was in visual art. Yeah, and that was when I was married. Okay. And then shortly after as well. And then I realized that I was wasting my parents' money after a certain point. I took classes to get the basics, but I'm very much of the like, if I want to do this, let's just go do it kind of mentality. And I have kept painting through the years, like a very slow trickle. This is actually mine behind me.
I like it. I was going to ask you about
But recently, especially with the quarantine, just being in the house, that's what I've been doing, is just painting again. And it's been really nice. That's definitely still a part of who I am as well.
I really like that piece up above you. I think that's beautiful. I've been admiring it this whole conversation.
Yeah, I think I finished that about 10 years ago. I actually started redoing it. I have a new version.
Oh, wow.
In process. But yeah, because I'm never going to sell that one. That one's for me. So I was like, well, I'll make a smaller kind of reinterpretation of it to sell. Yeah.
So do you sell your artwork then? Is that part of what you do?
Not really. At some point, I would like it to be. I've sold a couple things randomly here and there, but I've never been prolific enough to like make anything out of it. It's very possible that by the time this quarantine is over, I'll have enough paintings finished for a show.
I was thinking, is that a goal of yours?
Yeah, well, it's kind of turning into one. I mean, I think that I have at least 12 paintings that'll probably be done by the time this is all over.
That is so good. So artwork has been such a part of your life for a long time, being a visual artist and the music. I think this is really fascinating what your trajectory is. So as you're thinking about what you do and how you do it, where do you see yourself being in like 5 or 10 years? What would you like to be doing then?
I always kind of actually envisioned doing more painting as I got older and less music. I have thrown around the idea of retiring from performing at some point. I think that in the next 5 years, probably at least my performing is going to look different than it does now, and probably making more room for painting. But I am also excited to spend more time hopefully doing some recording projects and less time out hitting the pavement. I'm really happy with the 2 recordings that I have, but I have a lot of music that's never been recorded. And I'd like to be able to leave some record of that behind. And so I think that going forward, my focus is going to be a little bit more on making a record of my art for when I'm not here. I spent a lot of time when I was young, performing, which is great. It was tons of fun. And I gained an immense amount of experience doing that. And now I'd like to put that experience towards making some more concrete realities happen, at least musically, Some record that I was here and I did this thing, because it is all of my own material. I wrote all of it and I've never written it down. It's all just right here. I mean, I have random scribblings of like lyrics, but that's it. And so recording is really the best way to capture that kind of music. One of my favorite stories, and I'm sure this is an exaggeration, but I like it anyway, is that when Celtic bards used to train in order to receive their like final mastery of being a bard, they had to have 500 songs memorized. I have like 35 or something like that, and it's like a lot to keep in your brain. But they never wrote anything down either. There's this huge tradition in that area of the world that writing things down is bad. That if you want to have your wits about you, then you have to have everything in your brain. Because when you start writing things down, you start getting lazy and you start misinterpreting things. When I orally transmit something to you, you get all the facial cues and all. I mean, it's the same thing of like talk versus text, right? When you're teaching music to people, through memory and repetition, there's no room for mistake.
So Mariah, thank you so much for being with me today and for talking with me about your musical journey, the teaching, the different insights that you have about the music life here and your own musical, like I said, journey. But anyway, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Well, thank you for having me, and I look forward to chatting with you in the future.
Me too. I look forward to chatting with you more and hearing more of your insight. I'm seriously impressed with how you approach teaching and to hear more about your background in art. And I wish you the best on making recordings. And this isn't goodbye.
I'll see you soon.
All right. I'll see you later. Bye.